The first hint of dawn on 7th December 2025 painted the North Atlantic sky in shades of grey and bruised purple. On the bridge of HMS Kent, a British Type 23 frigate, the atmosphere was thick with a quiet tension. The ship sliced through the frigid waters of the Greenland-Iceland-UK Gap, a stretch of ocean long known as the Guyuk Gap. For decades, this had been a critical choke point, a gateway for Russian submarines seeking to break out into the vast expanse of the Atlantic. The crew were on high alert, their faces illuminated by the green glow of radar screens and sonar displays. They were hunting for something they could not see, a ghost in the deep. Commander Thomas Arden stood with his hands clasped behind his back, his gaze fixed on the sonar operator's station. The young sailor, barely out of his teens, stared intently at the waterfall display, a cascade of electronic noise. For hours, there had been nothing but the familiar sounds of the ocean, the groans of shifting icebergs far to the north, the chatter of shrimp, and the distant song of a whale pod. It was a monotonous, draining task, trying to pick out the faint, mechanical whisper of a hostile submarine from this cacophony. Arden knew the odds were against them. The enemy was a master of silence. Suddenly, a flicker on the screen, a transient sound, a brief anomaly that was there and then gone. The operator stiffened, his fingers flying across the console to replay the audio. He isolated the sound, filtering out the background noise. It was a faint metallic clang, almost imperceptible, like a spanner dropped onto a steel plate miles away. It was not natural. It was the sound of a hatch being secured or a torpedo tube door being cycled. Down below, in the cold, dark water, something was moving. Something that did not want to be found, but had for a fleeting second betrayed its presence. The alarm was not sounded. There was no shouting, no running. Instead, a quiet professional urgency filled the bridge. Arden leaned over the console, listening to the replayed sound through his own headset. "Confirm contact," he said, his voice low but firm. The ship's combat information center came alive. Other watchstanders began cross-referencing data, checking satellite feeds, and preparing the ship's own anti-submarine warfare systems. The hunt had truly begun. They had a scent, however faint, of a Russian Akula-class submarine, one of the quietest and most dangerous predators in the Kremlin's undersea arsenal. The game of cat and mouse had started. The Guyuk Gap is not just a line on a map. It is one of the most challenging naval environments on Earth. It is a vast underwater landscape of towering ridges, deep canyons, and unpredictable currents. This complex geography makes hunting submarines incredibly difficult. Sound, the primary tool for detection, does not travel in a straight line here. It bounces off underwater mountains, gets bent by layers of water with different temperatures and salinity, and is absorbed by the soft sediment on the seabed. For a sonar operator, it is like trying to find a whisper in a hall of mirrors during a rock concert. One of the biggest challenges is the phenomenon known as the thermocline. This is a layer in the ocean where the water temperature changes rapidly, creating a boundary that acts like a distorted mirror for sound waves. A clever submarine commander can dive just below this layer, effectively becoming invisible to surface ships whose sonar signals bounce right off the top of it. The Guyuk Gap is riddled with these thermal layers, which shift and change with the seasons and currents. It is a perfect hiding place, a natural cloak of invisibility for any submarine wanting to slip past NATO's watchful eyes. Furthermore, the ocean here is incredibly noisy. The constant flow of cold Arctic water, clashing with the warmer Atlantic currents, creates a perpetual roar. This background noise, known as ambient noise, is a constant source of frustration for sonar operators. It masks the subtle sounds of a submarine's machinery and propeller. A Russian submarine, engineered for quietness, can easily blend into this natural chaos. The captain can slow the reactor, turn off non-essential equipment, and move at a crawl, making the vessel's acoustic signature almost indistinguishable from the ocean itself. It is a deadly game of hide-and-seek in a place designed for hiding. This is why, despite HMS Kent's momentary detection, the Russian submarine had vanished again so quickly. The captain of the Akula submarine likely heard the faint ping of the British frigate's active sonar, a clear sign he was being hunted. In response, he would have immediately dived deeper, seeking refuge in a deep underwater canyon or tucking his vessel underneath a sharp thermocline. He would use the ocean's own features as his shield. The British knew he was down there, but finding him again in this treacherous underwater terrain would be like searching for a single black stone on a vast, dark beach at midnight. The Russian submarine, the Vapor, was a masterpiece of stealth engineering. Its hull was coated in special anechoic tiles, thick black rubber designed to do two things: absorb the pings from enemy active sonar, preventing them from bouncing back, and dampen the sounds from its own internal machinery, stopping them from escaping into the water. This rubbery skin made the submarine a black hole for sound. When HMS Kent sent out its sonar pulse, most of the energy that hit the Vapor was simply soaked up, leaving only the faintest of returns, easily lost in the ocean's background noise. Inside the submarine, every piece of equipment was designed for silence. The nuclear reactor and steam turbines, the heart of the vessel, were mounted on massive, complex rubber rafts. These platforms acted as shock absorbers, isolating the vibrations of the heavy machinery from the submarine's hull. The crew walked on sound-dampening floor mats and spoke in hushed tones. Any unnecessary noise, like a dropped tool or a clanging hatch, was a potential death sentence. The captain, Viktor Orlov, was a veteran of this silent service, a man who understood that in submarine warfare, silence was the ultimate weapon and the ultimate shield. Captain Orlov was an expert at using the ocean itself as a weapon. He knew the Geo Gap intimately, its currents, its thermal layers, its secret canyons. He would often hug the seabed, using the contours of the ocean floor to mask his submarine's presence. Or he would find a shadow zone, an area where the physics of sound propagation created a blind spot for surface sonar. He could also release decoys, small devices that emulated the sound signature of his submarine, sending any hunters on a wild goose chase while he slipped away in the opposite direction. It was a deadly, three-dimensional chess match played in total darkness. The Vipa's most significant advantage was its propeller. It was not a standard propeller, but a highly complex, computer-milled screw, shaped to move the massive submarine through the water with minimal noise. At low speeds, it created almost no cavitation, the telltale hissing sound made by collapsing water bubbles that plagues older submarines. This meant the Vapor could creep along at 5 knots, slower than a person can jog, and be virtually undetectable by passive sonar systems that only listen. The British on HMS Kent were not just hunting a machine, they were hunting a predator that had evolved to be perfectly at home in the silent, crushing dark. The mission of the Vapor was not to engage in a naval battle. Its purpose was far more sinister and aligned with modern hybrid warfare. Captain Orlov's primary target was not HMS Kent or any other NATO warship. His objective was the vast network of undersea cables lying on the seabed of the North Atlantic. These fiber optic cables are the true arteries of the modern world. They carry over 95% of all international data, from financial transactions and government communications to family video calls and social media updates. They are the physical backbone of the internet, and honestly, they are worryingly vulnerable. For NATO, the threat was twofold. First, the Russian submarine could use specialized equipment to tap these cables. By placing a device around a cable, it could potentially intercept the light signals passing through the glass fibers, siphoning off vast quantities of sensitive data. This could include military orders, diplomatic cables, and intelligence reports. it would be a catastrophic breach of security, giving the Kremlin an unprecedented window into the strategic thinking and operations of the Western alliance. The information gathered could be used for blackmail, espionage, or to gain a decisive advantage in a future conflict. The second, more direct threat was sabotage. The Viper was equipped with a deep-sea submersible drone and manipulator arms. It had the capability to physically cut the cables. Severing just a few of these key transatlantic lines would cause immediate and widespread chaos. Financial markets in London and New York could be thrown into turmoil, crippling economies. Military command and control systems, which rely on high-speed data links, could be disrupted. The entire communication infrastructure of Western Europe and North America would be degraded, isolating allies from each other at a critical moment. It was a strategic threat that could cripple NATO without a single shot being fired. This is why the presence of a single Akula-class submarine in the Guyayuk Gap was treated with such gravity. It was not just a military asset, it was a tool of strategic coercion. The mere possibility that Russia could sever these vital connections acted as a powerful form of intimidation. The mission of HMS Kent and its allies was therefore not simply to track a submarine. It was to protect the very foundation of the globalized world, to ensure the light stayed on, the data kept flowing, and the invisible ties that bind the Western world remained intact. The stakes could not have been higher. Aboard HMS Kent, frustration was mounting. After the initial fleeting contact, the Viper had gone completely quiet. Commander Arden had deployed the ship's most advanced piece of anti-submarine equipment, a towed array sonar. This was a long, thin cable, more than a kilometer long, embedded with highly sensitive hydrophones. It was reeled out from the stern of the frigate and trailed deep below the surface, far from the noise of the ship itself. This system was designed to listen for the faintest sounds of a submarine. But the ocean remained stubbornly silent. The Viper was either too deep, too quiet, or simply not where they were looking. Realizing he needed more assets, Arden sent out a request for air support. Within the hour, a British P-8 Poseidon maritime patrol aircraft arrived on the scene, circling high above the grey waves. The Poseidon was a submarine hunter's best friend. It dropped a pattern of sonobuoys into the water over a wide area. These were disposable floating sensors that dangled a hydrophone deep into the water and transmitted what they heard back to the aircraft. The crew of the P-8 analyzed the data, creating a much wider acoustic picture of the battle space, but still, they found nothing. The Russian captain was proving to be a ghost. The search pattern was expanded. The P-8 crew used their magnetic anomaly detector, a sensor that can detect the tiny disturbances a massive steel submarine creates in the Earth's magnetic field. They flew low over the waves, a risky maneuver in the choppy Atlantic weather, trying to get a lock. Yet the magnetic field remained stable. Captain Orlov was likely using a deep underwater canyon to shield his submarine from this type of detection, staying close to the volcanic rock of the seabed, whose own magnetic signature would mask that of his vessel. He was using every trick in the book. The hours dragged on. HMS Kent continued its slow, methodical search, and the Poseidon circled overhead, but the trail was cold. The British were facing a stark reality. Their conventional methods were failing. The Russian submarine was simply too advanced, and its commander too skilled. They knew the Viper was still out there, a silent threat moving towards its objective. Arden knew that if they did not find it soon, it would be too late. He had to concede that he needed help, and the only ally with the right tools for this specific job was across the ocean. The call went out to the US Navy. The American response was swift and technologically sophisticated. They did not send another surface ship or a conventional submarine, which might be detected by the Viper's own passive sonars. Instead, they deployed a different kind of hunter. From a base in Iceland, a US Navy P-8 Poseidon took to the skies, but it was carrying a unique payload. Tucked under its wing was an experimental drone, a large torpedo-shaped unmanned underwater vehicle known as the Manta. This was not just a sensor, it was a mimic, a ghost in the machine designed for deception. The American P-8 flew to the suspected location of the vapor and released the Manta drone into the sea. The drone silently activated, its electric motors making almost no noise. Its mission was not to find the Russian submarine, but to herd it. The Manta's true purpose was its advanced acoustic mimicry system. It could project highly realistic sound signatures of other vessels. Under the control of operators on the P-8, the Manta began to emit the precise acoustic profile of a Virginia-class submarine, the apex predator of the U.S. Navy's submarine fleet, a vessel that every Russian submarine commander feared. The drone did not move towards the vapor's last known position. Instead, it began a slow, deliberate patrol pattern far behind it, creating the illusion that a powerful American hunter-killer submarine was methodically clearing the water, boxing the Russian submarine in. The sound it projected was carefully calibrated. It was faint enough to seem distant, but clear enough to be unmistakably a Virginia-class sub on the hunt. It was a high-tech bluff, a calculated psychological operation designed to play on the Russian captain's deepest fears. The Americans were not just hunting the submarine, they were hunting the mind of its commander. Meanwhile, HMS Kent was ordered to change its tactics. The British frigate turned away, seemingly abandoning the search and heading east. This was all part of the trap. It was designed to make Captain Orloff believe his stealthy tactics had succeeded and that the immediate threat from the surface had gone. The entire operation was a carefully choreographed piece of theater. One ghost, the Manta drone, was being used to flush out another, the Viper, by making its captain believe he was being stalked by a far more dangerous adversary than a lone British frigate. The trap was set. Deep beneath the waves, Captain Orloff of the Vapor allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The British frigate that had been sniffing around had turned for home. His evasive maneuvers had worked perfectly. He had used a deep-sea trench to mask his approach, and now the path to the transatlantic cables lay open. He ordered his crew to make preparations for the deployment of the cable-tapping drone. The mission was back on track. His passive sonar operators continued their routine sweeps of the surrounding ocean, listening for any remaining threats. It was then that they heard it. A sound signature appeared on their screens, faint but undeniable. The experienced sonar chief paled. The acoustic profile was a perfect match for a U.S. Navy Virginia-class submarine. It was the one sound he had been trained his entire career to fear. The American sub appeared to be far behind them, sweeping the area they had just left. Orloff's blood ran cold. The British frigate had not been the real threat. It had been the bait. He was being herded. The Americans had been behind him all along, stalking him, waiting for him to reveal his intentions. The hunter had become the hunted. Panic began to set in. A Virginia-class submarine was faster, quieter, and more heavily armed than his Akula. In a one-on-one fight, the Vapor stood little chance. Every instinct screamed at him to run. His mission to the cables was now impossible. Continuing would mean sailing directly into the jaws of the American wolf. He could not risk his boat or his crew. The psychological pressure was immense. He was blind, relying only on the sounds his sonar picked up, and those sounds told him a superior enemy was closing the net. He had to make a choice: mission failure or probable destruction. Captain Orloff made the only choice he could. "Bring us about," he ordered, his voice strained. "Full speed. We are returning to base." The Viper abandoned its mission, turning north and accelerating towards the safety of Russian territorial waters. As the powerful submarine sped away, the crew of the American P-8 Poseidon watched its track on their screens, a triumphant smile on their faces. The Manta drone, its work done, powered down its acoustic projector. There had been no battle, no torpedoes fired, no lives lost. It was a victory won with cleverness and technology. A checkmate delivered in the silent, dark depths of the North Atlantic. The underwater chess game was over for now.